You are 23 years old, and you smell faintly of diesel and the department's harsh soap even on your days off. It's April 1986, and you're a fireman at Fire Station Number 2 in Pripyat, the model Soviet city built to house the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear plant a few kilometers away. You married Oksana just 7 months ago, a school teacher 2 floors up in your apartment block, and life here feels, by Soviet standards, almost enviably comfortable. Good wages, a new flat, the plant's cooling towers visible from your kitchen window, like something almost reassuring in their size. Duty tonight is routine. Nothing about this shift is supposed to be any different from the hundred before it. Just after 1 in the morning on April 26th, the alarm at the station goes off, and the dispatcher's voice on the radio describes it simply as a fire at reactor number 4. Nothing in the tone suggests anything beyond a routine industrial call. Your shift commander, Captain Orlov, a broad, unhurried man who's run this station for a decade, pulls on his gear without any particular urgency. Your friend Andrei, barely out of training, is already half dressed before the alarm finishes sounding, a habit he's proud of. None of you are issued anything beyond standard firefighting equipment. Nobody at the station tonight has any reason yet to think you'll need more than that. The drive to the plant takes only a few minutes, and what you see approaching it doesn't match anything in the dispatcher's description of a small fire. The roof of the turbine hall is burning, flames visible from a considerable distance, and above the reactor building itself, a strange pale blue-white glow hangs faintly in the air, unlike any fire you've ever seen before. Orlov doesn't slow the truck to study it. "Get the hoses up," he says, already moving, and you follow, because that's the job, and because nobody standing in that parking lot yet understands what that particular color of light actually means. Orders come to get men onto the roof of the turbine hall, and beyond it, toward the reactor building itself, to knock down the flames before they can spread to the neighboring units. You climb ladders in standard boots and a canvas jacket, no respirator, no laid apron, nothing beyond what you'd wear fighting a fire in any ordinary building in Pripyat. The roofing material has been coated in a tar-like sealant that's melting under the heat, sticking to your boots with every step. Small chunks of a dark, unfamiliar material litter the rooftop, kicked aside without much thought, though you'll later learn it was fuel from the reactor's own core, blown out onto the roof by the force of the explosion. Andre works a hose section a few meters from you, shouting something about a chess match he wants a rematch on once this shift ends, an attempt at ordinary conversation that feels almost defiant given the scene around you. Orlov moves between crews, checking on progress, calm as always, though even he pauses once, longer than usual, to look toward the reactor building itself, where the fire seems to be coming from somewhere far worse than a simple roof blaze. Within the first 30 minutes, several of the men closest to the reactor building start complaining of headaches and an odd metallic taste, symptoms nobody on that roof has a name for yet. By dawn, the visible fires on the turbine hall roof are largely knocked down, and the immediate blaze that called you out here in the first place looks, on the surface, like a job done. Nobody standing on that roof at sunrise understands yet that the real danger was never the fire itself, but the invisible radiation pouring out of the shattered reactor the entire time you were standing near it. You're pulled back to the station sometime after 5 in the morning, exhausted, throat raw, a headache building behind your eyes that coffee doesn't touch. You go home to Oksana for a few hours sleep, still in uniform, still not knowing what those hours on that roof have already done to you. You wake a few hours later feeling worse, not better, nausea that won't settle, a headache that coffee and aspirin do nothing for. By mid-morning, ambulances are moving steadily through Pripyat streets, and word spreads through the apartment blocks in the particular quiet way bad news spreads in a closed Soviet city, mostly through what isn't being said, rather than what is. Oksana wants to call a doctor. You tell her it's probably just exhaustion. Neither of you yet has any real vocabulary for what's actually happening to your body, because almost nobody in this city has ever needed that vocabulary before. That afternoon, you're one of dozens of men from the station ordered to report to the plant's medical unit, where a doctor takes one look at the burns already forming on exposed skin and doesn't bother finishing his examination before arranging transport. You're flown to Moscow within hours, to Hospital Number 6, a facility that specializes in radiation medicine and, until this week, rarely had reason to be full. Orlov is on the same flight, quieter than you've ever seen him. Andre jokes weakly about finally getting that rematch once you're both back on your feet. Nobody in that aircraft cabin says the word dying out loud, though it sits somewhere in the silence between every sentence anyone manages. Hospital number 6 fills quickly with men from that night, firefighters, plant operators, engineers who'd been on shift when the reactor failed. Doses are measured, sorted, and the sorting itself becomes its own quiet, terrible information, though nobody explains the numbers directly to the patients receiving them. Wives are allowed limited visits, kept carefully separated, precautions that feel less like comfort and more like confirmation of how serious this actually is. Oksana isn't permitted to fly to Moscow immediately. Your letters to her, dictated to a nurse in the early days because your hands have stopped cooperating properly, say considerably less than what's actually happening to you. Not every hard truth in that hospital belongs to the doctors. On the plant's grounds that first night, before any of you understood the danger, several men had grown so desperately thirsty from the heat and effort that they drank from the plant's cooling pond, water that turned out to be heavily contaminated. You remember watching one of them do it, remember thinking nothing of it in the moment, remember having no way at the time to know that the kindest thing you could have done was stop him. There was no way, standing on that rooftop in the dark, for any of you to have known which ordinary human instinct, thirst, exhaustion, simple relief, would turn out to cost the most. Captain Orlov's condition worsens steadily through the second week. You're moved to a different section of the ward by then, and the last real conversation you have with him is brief, both of you too tired for anything more. He presses a small metal lighter into your hand, the same one he's carried and reflicked absent-mindedly through a decade of shift changes at the station, and tells you, in a voice gone thin, to give it to Andre once you're both back on your feet, because Andre's always admired it and never had the nerve to ask outright. Orlov doesn't live to see whether that errand gets carried out. You carry it out anyway, a few days later, because it's the only thing left that feels like it's still his to give. Andre's decline follows a slower, crueler path than Orlov's did, weeks instead of days, treatments tried and adjusted, moments of apparent improvement followed by relapse. He keeps a single chess king piece on his nightstand the whole time, salvaged from a set some volunteer brought through the ward, and challenges anyone willing to sit with him to a game, though his concentration comes and goes in ways that have nothing to do with strategy. You give him Orlov's lighter on one of his better days, and he holds it a long while without saying much, turning it over slowly between fingers that don't move quite the way they used to. Andre dies in early June, quietly, during a night shift change, without any of the drama his chess table jokes might have led you to expect from him. There's no final clever line, no dramatic scene, just a nurse's soft voice waking you in the corridor outside his room to tell you it's already happened. You find the chess king still on his nightstand the next morning, and you take it, the same way you took Orlov's lighter, because leaving it behind feels like leaving a piece of him there too. Of the men who worked that rooftop with you in the first hours, more than 24 across the whole plant and fire brigade will not leave this hospital alive. Your own case, doctors eventually tell you, falls short of the doses that killed the men who spent longest closest to the reactor building itself. You'd worked the turbine hall roof, not the reactor roof directly, a difference of a few hundred meters and a few crucial minutes that turns out to separate survival from everything Orlov and Andre went through. It doesn't feel like good fortune when they tell you. It feels, mostly, like an accident of geography you'll spend a long time trying to make sense of, standing in a hospital corridor where so many of the men you knew did not get to walk out. You're finally discharged in late summer, with lasting damage to your health that doctors describe carefully and incompletely, the way doctors in this system tend to describe things they don't yet fully understand themselves. There is, in the strictest sense, no home left to return to. Pripyat was evacuated completely within 36 hours of the explosion and will never be resettled, the entire city left standing empty inside a restricted zone that swallows the fire station, your old apartment, the balcony Oksana used to wave from. You and Oksana are relocated to a new city entirely, given a new apartment, expected, in the practical Soviet way, to simply continue. Life in the new city takes shape slowly. A different fire station, different colleagues who know the outline of your story but not the details, a body that tires more easily than it used to, and occasionally reminds you, in small, unwelcome ways, of exactly where it's been. Oksana never asks you to explain the scars, and you never quite find the words to offer them unprompted. A particular shade of pale light at dusk, or the sound of a distant siren, can still stop you mid-stride on an ordinary street for reasons that have nothing to do with the present moment, and everything to do with a rooftop you can't fully leave behind. One evening, years later, Oksana asks you gently what those first hours on the roof were actually like. You tell her about Andrei's chess rematch that never happened, about Orlov's lighter, about the strange pale light in the sky that none of you had a name for at the time. You don't tell her about the man drinking from the cooling pond, or exactly how long it took Andrei to go, or the particular quiet of that hospital corridor at night. Some of it you keep, not because she couldn't bear to hear it, but because carrying it alone feels like the last thing you can still do for the men who never got to carry anything again. She holds your hand across the table and doesn't ask twice. The years that follow bring recognition slowly and unevenly. Medals eventually, medical benefits that arrive later and thinner than promised, a shifting official story about the disaster that takes years to settle into something resembling the full truth. You attend the funerals of men from that night at a steady, unwelcome pace through the late 80s and into the 90s, illnesses arriving on delay the way the doctors always warned they might. Each time, you find yourself standing a little straighter than you feel, the same instinct that got you up those roof ladders in the first place, because someone from that station still needs to be present when another name from that list is finally read aloud. In April of 2016, 30 years after that night, you travel back to the exclusion zone as an old man, part of an organized group, permitted brief, carefully monitored access to the area. Pripyat stands exactly as it was left, streets grown wild, your old apartment building visible from the road, windows dark and empty. A new steel structure, enormous, has been built over the ruined reactor itself in the years since, sealing away what's left of that night more completely than anything that existed when you last stood here. You carry Orlov's lighter and Andrei's chess king in your coat pocket, the way you have on every anniversary since. At the small memorial in the nearby town, a modest monument lists the names of the firefighters who died in the weeks after that night, Orlov's and Andrei's among them, alongside dozens of others from crews you never worked beside directly but have carried, in your own way, ever since. You set the chess king down at the base of the monument, keep the lighter closed in your palm, and stand there a long while in the particular quiet of a place built specifically to hold more grief than words usually manage. You never had a phrase carved into anything the way some men did before shipping out to a war. What you had instead was a shift that started like any other, and a debt to the men who didn't walk off that roof the way you did, one you've spent 30 years trying, in small ways, to repay.